So we've covered the basics of Electron and Node at this point, and what we're going to do now is learn how to bring React into that world so that we can build our cross-platform desktop applications using React to help structure our applications. One thing that I want to note before we jump into it is that if you go to the docs and you check out the boilerplate and command line interface page, there is a boilerplate for React. It is just a very complex boilerplate, so I think this will end up confusing folks if we were to use that. So what we're going to do is build our own simple boilerplate in class so that you understand all the pieces. And then if you want, as kind of like next steps as you're heading deeper into this world, I would encourage you to explore that boilerplate. Okay, so our plan, we are going to set up a new React application using create React app. Then we're going to learn how to add Electron to that application and view our React application through Electron. Then we'll learn how to add Electron Forge to package our application up for distribution, which means making our installer or making our app that we can send to folks to actually install on their machine. And then lastly, we'll learn how to bring our Firebase knowledge, so take our movie rating app that we built, into this new project template. One thing that I want to point out before we jump into it is that this next video or two is not going to involve a ton of writing code. It is more about the build process that we're setting up. So how do you configure a project to use all of these tools that are already existing rather than writing a whole bunch of things from scratch? Okay, so let's kick things off with creating our new React application. So you're going to want to go onto your machine wherever you are storing this work. So we're in week 4 here. I am going to open up a terminal here, and we're going to use create React app. So I'm going to say npx create React app, and we're going to call this Electron React demo. This is going to take a minute to run, so I'm going to pause the video while it's running. Okay, so that finished setting up our application. So I can go into this folder and open this up with Visual Studio Code. And this is our basic React template with a simple application loaded into it. And what we want to do is configure this so that when we run it, npm run start, we don't actually open up a browser window anymore. We want this to just open up our local server so that we can load that through Electron rather than our browser. And if we go to the create React app documentation, which is createreactapp.dev here, and we look under advanced configuration, this is telling us that if we set up environment variables or a .env file, we can configure a few things about create React app, like which host and port it's using when the server started up. But also the first option here tells us that if we have the browser option, we can choose a specific browser, or we can set it to none to disable the browser completely. So we're going to set it to none. So we're going to come in here, we're going to create a new file. It's a .env file where we say browser equals none, give it a save, and then if we do npm run start, our application will no longer pop open a browser window. So let's give this a second to run. Okay, so no browser window has popped open here. I can still grab this URL, localhost 3000, load it, and see our application running. So this will be the server, this will be the URL that we're going to load in Electron. We just don't want it to pop open in our browser. Okay, so we got this first step done here. So let's move on to the second step, adding Electron and viewing React through that Electron application. So flipping back to Visual Studio Code, I am going to kill this server, and we're going to install a couple of dependencies that we're going to need here. So we are installing them as dev dependencies, which you can say which you can tell npm to do by passing the flag with -D here. And then we can say a number of dependencies that we want to install without, all in one by passing them in with spaces. So we can say electron space concurrently space wait-on. So these are 3 separate packages that we're all installing as development dependencies. And you want to make sure that you're spelling these exactly correctly before you fire off this command. And what this is going to do is our application currently does not have any development dependencies. It only has regular dependencies. So we will see a new spot in our package.json being added for those development dependencies. And quick review, our dependencies are the modules that we use in our actual application, and the development dependencies are ones that we use in our kind of build pipeline to run our application. And the reason why it's important to make this distinction as we're working on Electron applications is that when we package up our application for publication, these development dependencies don't get packaged up into that application. So this allows us to reduce the amount of code in our build by making sure that things that aren't needed in the actual application don't get packaged up as a dependency. So this is going to take a second to finish installing. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while that's running. All right, so that finished here, and down here I now have my dev dependency of concurrently, Electron, and wait on, and we'll introduce concurrently and wait on when we get to them. We're going to have to do a couple of tweaks to our setup here to get things ready for Electron. So one, if you remember when we set up our application previously using the quick start guide, the index.html had this content security policy in it, which indicates to Electron where certain pieces of content are allowed to be retrieved from. So this is saying that the scripts, the source code for the scripts, can come from wherever the application is being hosted and can also be injected inline. Security is kind of its own big topic in Electron, and there's actually a page in the docs here. Let's go to it. So security strategies, there's a whole page in here that talks about them, and one of the things that you want to keep in mind is your Electron applications have more access to a user system than your typical website, because we're basically in a node environment. And so there are a lot of strategies that you can employ to help secure that, to make sure that you don't accidentally expose users to malicious code. One piece of that is to do this content security policy and lock down where the source of things can come from. We're sort of just going to use this boilerplate without diving too deep into security. Just know that if you want to get something ready for production, you'll want to do a bit more on the security side before sort of deploying this and sending this to people to install. So I'm just going to grab this meta tag here, and we're going to drop it into our index.html that came from Create React App, and dropping it in here at the top of the head. So that should be set up, and now what we can do is start setting up the build process, so making sure that Electron loads our local host, and then configuring our build process to start up that local host and then load Electron when the local host is ready. So let's start by getting our Electron project set up here with a main process. So remember, Electron has these 2 separate processes. There's the main process, which is our kind of node environment that's booting up the application, and then there's our render process that is our code that's running in the browser. So what we're going to want to do is create a new file in here called electron main.js, and I'm putting this at the root of my application, so it is sitting next to my package.json file. And then you can either write this from scratch, or I will also have a starter file here in the browser that you can, or hosted via GitHub, that you can pull down and bring into the project. So it's really just the boilerplate that we created last time, with one exception. Instead of loading a file path, we are loading localhost port 3000. So actually, I'm just going to copy the starter file in here to Electron main. And I'll make sure that that link is in the description. So really, this is the same thing that we've done when we were learning Electron. We import the app module from Electron. When it's ready, we go ahead and create a window, and you can control the size, height, some of the preferences. Where we saw last time that we could remove the frame, we could maximize the window. We have all sorts of configuration options here. And once that window's been created, then we can point it at a particular file path, or here we can actually point it at a URL. So we're pointing it at localhost 3000, which is the default that React runs on. So before we add any more, let's go ahead and make sure that this initial setup is working. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to come back to our package.json, and we are going to set up a script so that we can run our Electron application. So I'm going to call this Electron, and what we're going to do is run the Electron command and point it at the current directory. And remember, this package.json, it's a JSON file, which is JavaScript object notation. Make sure that you've got a comma after your scripts. The other change we need to make here is, I'm going to put it up here. We're going to create a main field and point it at our Electron main.js. So this is what Electron is going to read to try and find the main process code when we boot up Electron. So then to test that this is working, what we want to do is open two terminals here. And I'm going to split them so that we can see them side by side. On the left one, I'm going to run our React application. And on the right one, I am going to run our Electron application. So the Electron application, depending on when the React application finished, if it had not finished yet, this window would be white. There would be nothing loaded because that local server hadn't started. But as soon as it starts up, we should see our Electron application because we have told this Electron application to load localhost 3000. And once we've got this set up, we should have our hot reloading. So if I come into here and I say, hooray for Electron and React, give it a save, wait for this to finish recompiling. Now our application inside of Electron has hot reloaded. So you can do this development process where you open up two terminal windows, one to start up React and one to start up Electron. But that's annoying if you have to do that every time you start up your application. And that's what those other dependencies are included in this project for. So let's kill this. I'm going to close Electron, and I'm going to hit Control-C to kill our React. I'm going to close these terminals. Let's take a quick look at our documentation for the concurrently package and the wait on package. So to find these, you would just search the name of the package, concurrently, and then npm. Whoops, not currently, concurrently. So open that up in a new tab, and let's also grab wait-on and open that up in a new tab. So concurrently allows us to run multiple commands concurrently. Like this is the Unix way of doing that, where you use the single ampersand to indicate that two things should be running simultaneously. The problem is that that's not cross-platform. So if you're on Windows, that's not going to work. And so that's why we're using a package here that allows us to pass in two commands to run and run them concurrently. The wait on package allows us to wait for files, ports, HTTP resources to become available before running a command. So we'll be able to say, hey, don't run Electron until this localhost port 3000 is now available. So we're going to use both of those in our npm scripts. So first thing we want to do is we're going to set up a new script here called dev, which is going to be the thing that we run when we start up our application. And this is where we want to concurrently say, go ahead and run start, and go ahead and start up the Electron. Both of those being the scripts here. Start the start script and the Electron script. So the command is concurrently, and we're going to pass in the K flag here, which if we look at the concurrently docs, let's see, here it is. Killing other processes. What this does is if you kill one of the processes, so either the start, our Electron, or sorry, the start command which runs our React application, or the Electron command which runs our Electron app, it will kill the other. So this will just make it easy. If we close the Electron window, the React app will stop running too. And then what we need to do here in our npm scripts is pass in these commands in quotation marks, which, because we're in JSON, is tricky because we already have quotation marks defining the start and end of the script. So what we have to do is escape those quotation marks here by putting a backslash before each of the quotation marks. So we can say npm start to indicate we should be running this npm script. And then we're going to specify another one here, starting and ending quotation marks, and we'll say npm electron. So again, syntax is kind of tricky to write the first few times because you're going to have to escape both of these quotation marks that are around your commands. But once we've got that running, we should be able to open up a terminal and say npm run dev and get concurrently running. And you'll see down here that we now have the output from both commands. We can see there's the start command printing out a few things, then the Electron command prints out a few things here, and then our start command finally ends up running and tells us that the application is compiling successfully on localhost 3000. So this window, let me kill this and start it up again. When that Electron opens up, it's going to be blank because our React application hasn't finished compiling. So this is where we want to add the wait on so that Electron only pops up when the application is ready to go. And you can see here, if I close the Electron application, it kills the start command. And actually, a kind of bug with how concurrently works is that you'll see a bunch of errors printing out here related to the end of life cycle. Don't worry about that. That is part of what happens when concurrently kills the other process. So we killed Electron, and then it goes ahead and kills start and kills it with an error code. So this particular error you can ignore, but compile errors from your React application or errors from your Electron application you don't want to ignore. Let's run clear here to get a fresh window. So we've got it concurrently, and now we just want to modify our Electron command to actually wait on the server before Electron boots up. And if we go to the wait on documentation here, we can see we can just pass in a file or a URL, 2 ampersands, and then the next command that you want to run. So we're going to wait on localhost port 3000, and then 2 ampersands, and then our Electron command to boot up Electron. So wait-on http://localhost port 3000 and electron dot. So the 2 ampersands here means run things in sequence. This is actually cross-platform accessible, so you can run this on a Windows machine, you can run this on a Mac machine, this particular syntax, the 2 ampersands. Okay, so now if we run npm run dev, no Electron window pops up until, give it a few seconds, our application has finished compiling. And here we go. We've got our React application running. And let's look back at our whiteboard. So we have gotten Create React App set up, and we have added Electron so that we can view our React app through Electron. The next thing that we want to do is configure this so that we are packaging up our application using Electron Forge. So before we do that, let's look at the Electron Forge documentation. So Electron Forge is specifically a tool for helping you go through the process of taking your source code that runs through Electron and turning it into an installable executable that you can share with folks. So you can get an exe that you can share with people on Windows, or an app that you can share with folks on Mac, etc. If we look at the docs, we can see, hey, here's how we can create a new application that's set up with Forge. And then down here, we can see it will give us a make command that will allow us to build that distributable that we can share with folks. We're not going to set up our application using Forge because we already have our application set up with Create React App the way that we want. So we're actually going to run the import command here. So once we're in our application, we can run the CLI here and say, go ahead and import our project into Forge. It's going to try and make some modifications to get our application ready for Forge. And then once it's set up, we can start using the configuration and the CLI for Forge. So the CLI provides a couple of things for us. So CLI stands for Command Line Interface. Once we've got it in our project, we can run Electron Forge init. We can run Electron Forge import, install, lint, make, and you can see the rest over here. We'll go through this as we're running these commands, but to give you a sense of a few of the commands, there is package, which takes our application and packages it up for the specific target that we are trying to target. So that could be we're trying to target a Windows machine or a Mac or a Linux machine. So it's going to package up the application and put it into a folder that we could run on that application. So it's a portable folder. So once we've done this, we could zip it up and send it to someone else and they could run it on their machine. Though you probably won't be doing that. You could. So that's what package does. Then make allows you to, package up that application and then make it into a distributable application for your target platform. So for instance, if that's on Windows, instead of getting a folder of all those files, we would get an exe that allows you to install that application on your target. And then the last one here, publish, tries to package and make that application and then publish it to a specific target. So they have a description of some of the publisher targets here, like publishing it to GitHub so that executable is hosted on GitHub or Bitbucket or S3 buckets. So these will allow you to push your executable to some service so that other folks can download it. For this video, we're really just going to be focused on starting off by packaging our application to see it actually get set up in that folder, and then try to make our application to make that distributable for our project. Okay, so what we're going to be doing to kick things off is running this import command here. So keep in mind, this is going to modify our project. So we want to make sure we have all of these files saved, that there are no changes before we run this import. And it is Electron Forge /CLI at latest. This is just grabbing the latest version of the command line interface and then passing in, hey, run the import command here. So once I run this, it's going to try and install some dependencies, add some new files, and modify our package.json. So I'm going to pause the video while this is running because it's going to take a couple seconds, and when we come back, we will modify some of those changes. And we're back and it finished. So we can actually see what it did. It initialized the Git repository, it modified our package.json, installed a bunch of dependencies, and then modified our Git Ignore. So it did its best to try and understand our structure, but it wasn't perfect and actually messed up something, which was to be expected. So what it did was it came here, it overwrote our start command and said, let's run Electron Forge start instead of create React apps start command. So we need to undo this. We need to say, nope, that wasn't right. We want to run our React scripts start. And then we can see that it modified and added these two other commands here, which we don't have to touch. So the package and make scripts, these run package and make from Electron Forge. So remember, package gives us that folder for our target distribution, and make gives us the actual distributable version of our project. So we'll run those after we finish configuring our project. If we take a look, we can see this has added some dev dependencies down here that are coming in from Electron Forge. It added a dependency up here for Electron Squirrel, which is useful for Windows builds. And it also, down at the bottom, added this config, which allows us to configure how Forge runs. So to get started, there are a couple of things we need to add that Forge wants us to have in our package.json. So one is a description of the project here. So I'm just going to call this our Electron plus React class demo. But you would put in a description that describes whatever your application does. Then we need to add an author here. And author is Mike Hadley. We also want to add in a homepage property here for configuring our React application properly. So this is looking good. We've got our description, our author, our homepage. Oh, you know what? We do actually have to modify our package and our make here before we move on. And so what we want to do is run our build before we actually do our package. So React scripts build and remember, this allows us to chain things in sequence. So we're running our build before we run the package, which means that anytime we run package, we get a fresh build that then gets packaged up. And we need to do the same thing here. React scripts build and Electron Forge make. Okay, so we're looking good with our package.json so far. What we need to do is, if we look at our Electron main, this always loads the application on port 3000, which is not what we want to do. What we need to do is when we are running our application in development mode, when we're running npm run dev, it's fine to load it over the local host because we're serving up our application on that local host using create React app. But when we actually package up our application and set it up in a distributable, we're not loading over a local server. We're not starting up a server. We are just going to load our build folder, which is when we run our build command, it takes our source and our public compiles and builds everything out to a build folder. So we're gonna have to modify our code here to be aware of whether or not we're in development mode. If we are, it's fine, load this local host. If not, then go ahead and load our build folder. So to do that, we're gonna install a dependency. So let's save our package.json after those changes, and then we're gonna, well, let me clear this so that we don't have all of that history, and then I'm gonna run npm I electron is dev. So I'm installing this as a regular dependency because we're, cool. Oh, so this is great. Something went wrong with the npm install process. And this I have found sometimes happens with when I set up my project with Forge. So what it's telling me to do is rerun npm install to install all the dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. npm I, this is going to regenerate all of those dependencies. Fun. Okay, that didn't work. So on the fly, another thing that I will do is often if something goes completely wrong here in the setup, I'm going to delete my package.json and go ahead and rerun npm install. And then if that doesn't work, my next resort is to remove the package lock and remove the node modules folder and then reinstall. It looks like this has fixed it. So as you're working on your project, if you run into problems, a couple of things that you can try. You can try running the install command again. I have found that on Windows, sometimes there's an error with accessing files that breaks the install command. And then going through this process of blowing away your package lock, trying to install again, or blowing away your node modules and trying to install again. So I'm going to pause while this finishes getting set up, and we'll come back and get that new dependency into our project. And we're back. So it finished installing. Looks like there were no errors. So I'm going to clear, and then I am going to run npm install electron is dev. So electron is dev is a package that simply tells us whether or not we're in development mode, which will allow us to check, have we run this dev command, or has this been packaged up? Whoops. Did not mean to click that. Or has this been packaged up and made? So we are going to modify our Electron main to use that package. And for reference, that GitHub repository where I will have this linked also has the complete Electron main for today. So you can refer to that if you run into problems. But I would encourage you to build it along with me so that you actually understand the pieces as we add them. So what we need to do here is import this module. Require electron is dev. And remember, we're in a node environment, so we're going to be using require here, not import. So this is just a Boolean value. It's a true/false that tells us whether or not we are in development. And what we can do is down here decide, do we want to load this local host or do we want to load a specific location on the hard drive? And you know what, we're also going to need the path module, and this is built into Node, which allows us to form file paths. So let's do this. Let's say here's our file path, and it is a template string where we say file // and we're going to insert a path here using path.join. So this allows us to pass in a series of paths or folders, and the path.join will go ahead and join them together into one path that will work across operating systems. So dir name is a global variable that tells you where this script is located. So we're getting the directory where Electron main is located. And then we can go into our build folder and into index.html. So that's our file path. And while we're in development here, let's console log file path. So we'll see it in our console window. And then what we're going to do here is when we're loading that URL, we're either going to load localhost if we're in development or this file path. And the way that you can do that is using an if statement or using a ternary conditional operator. So we've seen this before in the React context. The way it works is if this, whatever's here, evaluates to true, this is what gets returned. If it evaluates to false, this is what gets returned. So isDev is already a Boolean that tells us whether or not we're in development. If it's true, we're going to be on this localhost. If it's false, we'll load this file path. So let's go ahead and run our dev command, which this will load us in development mode. So we should still see that local host set up. And we should, if we look through our logs here, well, we got our application loading, so we're good. We're still loading localhost. Let's see, where is our path that we printed out here? Ah, here it is. It's down at the bottom. So we can see that our Electron command is telling us here is the location where it's expecting to find the file to load. So we're in my desktop teaching folder, CodeSprint.c, class materials, Electron demo, build, index.html. So that looks right to me. And this is similar to what we did in the basic quick start here. This loaded index.html. And here, instead of loading index.html, loading a file relative to this file, we are just specifying a full path here that starts with the file :// protocol. So let's see if this works. Now that I've got this path set up, I'm going to go ahead and remove the console log, and let's kill the Electron command here. And what I want to do is run our package. So this command that should build our application to that build folder, and then should try and package up everything into Electron Forge. So let's hope that we got everything set up and that package will run successfully. Again, this is another command that's going to take a while to run, especially the first time here. So I'm going to pause the video while this is running. All right, so that finished running, and package by default tries to package up for the particular architecture that we're running on. So here it's trying to package up a Windows build for x64 architecture. So what that did, if I open this up in File Explorer, is create this out folder that has a folder for that particular build here. And if I look in that, what that's given me is an executable that has the name of our package here. And then in our resources folder, it has all of our application. So you can see that it copied over everything from the root of our project here into this app folder. So that build is available to our executable because it's in here. Our node modules are in here. The dev dependencies have been stripped away so that this is as trim as it can be. And here's our Electron main. So in production, this is what's running. So this folder, if we were to zip this up and send it to someone on a Windows machine, would be able to run without the person having to run any of our NPM scripts. So here, if I just double click on the executable, we get our React application loading up over the file system. So our modification with checking isDev is working here. And one thing that you usually want to do is pop open your developer tools to make sure that there are no errors. So if something went wrong, this will give you a clue as to what has gone wrong over here. So excellent, we got our basic version here where we got our Create React app set up with Electron and Electron Forge so that we're building our application. I want to show a couple of extra things that are nice to have here. And then we'll also make the application. So we'll see what it looks like generating that installer. So first, our Git Ignore, if I go in here, there's nothing to ignore the output folder, which is pretty large. Electron apps tend to be large because they have Electron bundled with them. They got a browser in here. So this is already quite large. I want to compress this and also make sure that this folder never ends up in my Git history. So I'm going to add to my Git Ignore the distributables. Let's ignore the output folder that is at the root of our application. So now that should show up in Visual Studio Code is grayed out because it is not in our Git history. Let's go ahead and under the configuration here for Forge Packer config, this we can pass in some things. If we check out our docs for Electron Forge and look at configuration, the Packer config is config that's sent to the Electron Packer application, which we can check out their docs to see what other options you can specify here. The one that I want to use, I already know off the top of my head, and it is ASAR true, which this is the Electron way to package up and compress your project into a compressed format. So now if I were to save this and rerun my package command, I'm going to pause this for a second while this runs because, again, it's going to take a minute, but we'll see the result in a second. All right, that finished, and if I look at the folder, so here I'm looking at my out folder again, I'm looking at this project, all of this stuff looks about the same, but if I go into my resources, instead of an app folder that I can explore, there's an app.asar, which is that compressed version of our application. So this will still be able to load the same, it's just that Electron will take care of unpacking that for us when we ask for a specific file from that app. All right, cool. So we've got our output compressed. I want to install 2 more packages and set them up in our main to finish this off. So, you know what? One of them is already installed. So this is probably already installed in your setup by Forge, so we don't need to install that. Electron Squirrel Startup. That's on Windows machines. We'll want to include that, or when we're building for Windows, we'll want to include that. The other one I want to install is the Electron DevTools installer, which is a package that allows us to install our React DevTools extension. Because right now, if I load up our Electron React application and I check out the developer tools and I try, let's undock this so that we get it bigger, and we look at this dropdown. Normally we had our components explorer here, which was really helpful when we're debugging React applications. The process of installing those into your React environment is tedious, so there's a nice package that allows us to set this up. Okay, so again, this you can grab the complete Electron main and bring it into your project. And maybe since we're going long, I will just do that. All right, so let's go in here, and a couple of things that have been added here. All the stuff at the bottom is the same for creating the window and quitting, but up at the top we have a couple of things. So if we are in development mode, we import that developer tools installer, and we set up 2 global variables that we're going to use in a second. We handle kind of a bug that happens on Windows machines with the Electron Squirrel startup package. And then down here, after we start up our application, we handle 2 things. We install the React developer tools, and we print things out So this returns a promise. So we can say if that resolves successfully, tell us that we added the extension. If there was an error, go ahead and tell us what the error was. And then I've got this chunk here to open up the developer tools automatically when the first frame of the application finished loading. You can remove that. You don't necessarily need that in your application, but I find it useful to always pop open the developer tools when I'm working. So I'm going to grab this, paste it into my Electron file, and then I'm going to start up our application in development mode. So when we're starting it up in development mode, that means that we should be installing those dev tools. So we should be able to see them. And we can see some things printed out here. Looks like it added the extension successfully for React developer tools. There's a warning that's associated with that's coming from Node. We can kind of ignore that. That's not a problem. So here we've got our application loaded. The React developer tools popped open immediately. Whoops, didn't mean to hide everything. Let's bring that back. Okay, so we've got our developer tools here. We've got our application. If I drop down here, I can see my components. I can explore the components. I can edit them using the components. And I've also got the profiler from the React developer tools. I've found sometimes on first install, this does not load immediately when the developer tools are set up. So if that happens for you, just kill the application and start the dev command over again. So once we've got that set up, we're done with our Electron main, and we can run from our package here the make command for the first time. So I'm going to clear my console window and run npm make. So what npm make does, we've set up to build our application fresh and then run the make command from Electron Forge, which does a package. So it generates a new package, and we'll try to create an executable of that distributable for sending to someone else to run on their machine. So instead of giving someone a folder that has the application in it, like on Windows, that would be a folder that has an exe in it, we're now going to have something that can be installed on the user's machine. So we'll have an executable that can install that on a Windows machine, or on Mac, you'll get an app. So it'll be set up for whatever your target machine is. And again, with package and make, if we don't tell it what target to use, it is just going to target whatever machine we're running on. So for me, that's going to target Windows because I'm running from a Windows machine. So this is going to take another second to finish running. So while that's running, I'm going to pause the video. And it finished, so now I can look for that out folder here. So again, I'm in my repository. I go into out. I've got my package set up here with that executable that I can double click. But I also now have under the make folder for that particular publisher, which was the Squirrel Windows publisher, an executable that will install this on my machine. So if I go ahead and double click this, this is going to take a second, install it under my machine. And now I will be able to, if I close this, I'm going into my start menu, and I can see that Electron React is added. I can just load that from my machine now. So I don't need anything that's in this folder anymore because I have installed this onto my machine. And with the Squirrel Windows setup, it actually creates a desktop link too. So I can go to my programs folder, which is off screen on this recording, or I can go ahead and double click it to open up that app. And then if I want to install it, uninstall it, I am going to, oh, nope, can't do it from here. So I'm going to open up add remove programs and look for that in here and uninstall it on Windows. process is going to be different for each operating system. So one thing I want to mention is these publishers are each different pieces. Whoops, not publishers. These are the makers. Are different pieces of software. So like Squirrel Windows is its own piece of software that this Electron Forge just uses to build the executable, and has its own setup and its own configuration options. So whatever you're using, whichever one you're using, you'll want to check out the associated settings to configure anything for that maker. This also transitions nicely into talking about the fact that we are now running a lot of pieces of software together. So there are a lot of places where things could go wonky. So as you're debugging, you want to think about the errors that you're getting. Like if you ran one of these commands and got an error, think about where that's coming from, and think about what you need to do to debug that. So it could be because make runs our build, there could be a problem with our React application, and that's why this failed. Or there could be a problem with our package.json when it was trying to set up our config for building that application. Or the error could be coming from when we run our Electron Forge make, it could be coming from our maker here, the Squirrel, Windows Squirrel application that takes our source code and builds an executable, or an installable executable. But if everything went correctly, here we have a template that is set up using React. So we've got our React scripts loading our application. We have our Electron application running in development mode, looking at that local host and running it. And we also now have the ability to package up and make our application for target platforms. In the next video, I'll show you how to set this up with Firebase, which is going to require a couple of extra pieces of setup. But to get started with React, we now have a template that would work for building React applications. And this was a lot of setup, but at this point, if you were to commit this to GitHub, you would have a template that you could use for any React application that you want that's already set up with Electron and Electron Forge.